Hello everyone, thank you for attending this Namos user group webinar. Today we have Danielle Evans doing a presentation on VB Studio and Redwood. We also have Sophia Ravenscroft who will be monitoring the Q&As. So if you have any questions, please can you write them in the Q&A section. Without going into any more of those details, please can I hand over to Danielle.
Thank you, Ian. Hello, everybody. I'm Danielle Evans. I'm an HCM consultant in the delivery team at Namos. I am presenting today something that you might have seen if you attended the UK Oracle user group in December. If anyone has any sort of friends in the local authority, maybe they've sung my praises there too. I'm only joking. So for today, we're going to be taking you through Visual Builder Studio and Redwood and how we intend to support our clients to make that migration step. Some of the things around Redwood that you might have heard is that there's plenty of amazing features in that. That's designed to engage you, to make that user experience more mobile responsive, to bring more things onto fewer page points so that you don't have to go to lots of different areas of the system to do the same thing. And this is a sort of a migration back to how person management used to work, in the sense that you would have pop-outs for lots of different aspects on a person through the activity center as a new feature. Responsive, I think, has been the main focus for the last few years, where you would have actions as the initial step on things. Whilst that will continue in the Redwood world, there's a lot more of a user experience built around having one-stop shops, essentially. Native to that is Gen AI and your AI agents. If any of you have been attending webinars related to the AI-related announcements that Oracle have been plugging in the last couple of months, you'll know that there's lots of really exciting things coming. Those are only available in Redwood. So there's more than just the incentive on the timeline to make the move before 25C. There's lots of really interesting and amazing things that can be made available if you make that step. So Redwood is essentially a from the ground up built user experience that Oracle have designed through Visual Builder Studio. And for those of you developer-minded, may have heard of Visual Builder Studio before Oracle have used it for this. So it's not something that Oracle have developed specifically for this purpose. And it's available through other aspects for Apex as well. So Redwood is essentially all the same database tables, but there's some new things in there that aren't necessarily going to work in the same way as your responsive pages work now. And that's around things like REST APIs and how your pages actually get furnished with information from different parts of the system. So what Oracle has shared with all of their clients as well as with their partners is the release timeline. So if you've not seen this before, this is available on Customer Connect, where you can access lots of different articles and pieces of information and share best practice with other clients. This Redwood release timeline is pretty solid now. There was a time last year when things were moving around, timelines were being extended. This is it now. For those of you who haven't moved to Redwood and you're HCM focused, as this session was going to be predicated on HCM mostly, you'll know that there's a lot of things that need to move before 25C. So if we look at this timeline, that will be global HR, benefits and absence, payroll, time and labour, talent management and recruiting. And I'll just call out that time and labour is in two separate parts here. For those of you using the self-service time cards, that's aiming to go over 25A, which I think the majority of people, if you're on Cadence A, should have already received. If you're not on Cadence A, then you might be getting the update in March or in April. And again, if you're using time cards, you'll need to have made that change before you make that upgrade. Journeys has been around for a couple of years, actually. This is a Redwood only feature, but was available pre needing to adopt Redwood. And that replaces your checklists on onboarding. So for those of you who might have used onboarding and checklists for moving people from the application stage into offer and then into core as an employee or as a contingent worker, this journeys feature replaces that functionality and then is again a very powerful tool. And you'll learn a little bit later in today's session how critical this particular functionality will be for accessing those AI agents. Okay, so you might be asking the question, well, how do I actually make the move from responsive, from classic into Redwood? And so Oracle, again, have shared this in their migration strategy on Cloud Customer Connect to give you a bit of a viewpoint as to how you might make that step. So whether that's just one module at a time, whether that's you're focusing on self-service aspects before you do the back end for administrators, this step-by-step function is tried and tested. We've used this at Namos internally for some of our greenfield clients and have also used it in some of the packages that we give to clients to do migration once they're live. So we're starting off with environment readiness analysis and configuration. And what that means is having a look at what functionality you have that you can make and switch on now. Whether you're at the point where you have enough features available in the Redwood releases that you think you're ready to make this migration step. And I would say most people should be at that point now that we're at the start of 2025, given we need to be moving by 25C. And identifying those pages that you can convert into Redwood, you need to be analysing what personalizations you've got. So if you've not heard of the Personalisation Helper tool, we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. That's going to help you make that analysis of what you have in your HCM features in responsive and what can be moved over to Redwood without you having to do a whole lot of original setup again. Testing is going to be really important here. What you'll see again later on in the presentation is some of the lessons learned that we've picked up on and the things that we would encourage you to take a look at if you're doing this migration for yourself. Lots of things are different in Redwood than they have been in responsive and classic previously. I touched on the fact that the pages themselves are built from the ground up through Visual Builder Studio, and what is delivered to you is essentially not just a new skin, but a difference in how it actually processes the information through security. So if you're an employee and you have an employee role that's seeded from Oracle, you made no changes to it, you should experience quite a clean testing run through. If, however, you've made lots of different things and changed your custom roles for employees or HR specialists, and you've not touched them over the years, you might find you might need to rebuild some things. So really do follow through and test anything that you're migrating to Redwood from start to finish, as if it's a regression testing when you receive an upgrade. Okay. So in leading up to the timeline of 25C, what we would suggest you do is look at your dependency. So not just around in the system, what kind of things are available now. It's also about your team. So who do you have available? What are your resources like? What's the skill level in your organization? And what's your adoption strategy going to look like? How ready are your users going to be for this change? And the way that Redwood is designed is to be more sort of commercial graded. So when you use Amazon or you update your Facebook app or Instagram, you'll notice little variations in how things appear or where certain features are. They move from one place to another. That approach, there's no training in it. So if you're an Instagram user, you don't receive a little document about where new things are. You may decide to take the same approach with how you release your Redwood functionality, that you have a big bang, allow people to take on board the different things that have changed, and then just periodically roll out additional bits that enhance the experience. And that's a good way to sort of get started now. Pick off a few little areas that don't need as much personalization, get it socialized, and then drip, drip, drip until you get to 25C. So yeah, in terms of your dependency, think about your resources, think about what's highest impact, and think about your available features. Some of the other things that you might need to be assessing as soon as possible would be your existing customization. So the Personalisation Helper tool that Oracle have released is available in their Cloud Center of Excellence pages. Each upgrade, you need to download a new version of that. You would only need to do this activity once, I would say, because you're only making the migration from what you would usually use. That's around your Design Studio, your structure changes and all the rest of it. That you would only need to migrate once and then build upon it. So if you haven't done it already, download the new version from the Cloud Center of Excellence and get started. In terms of deprecated features, there is a period of change between upgrades with Redwood where a feature that you used to have in responsive might not have an equivalent in your new Redwood page. And Those features might be as broad as descriptive flex fields, in which case you're going to want to raise SRs or speak on Customer Connect about things that might be missing from functionality. But there are other things that just don't have a version of it yet. So if you're a customer that uses the autocomplete rules, so if you're going through, let's say, a change of assignment page and you've got a default to say the start date of any change must be the 1st of the month, and that's the default that goes in there, it's not necessarily going to have an equivalent of that in the new Redwood page yet. What we know from Oracle's roadmap in terms of their development pipeline is that those features are coming, they're just not there yet. So again, take an assessment of the things that you have at the moment and whether you can run with it as it is without those features, or whether it's absolutely critical and you need to then raise that through Oracle as it's something that would be a showstopper that would prevent you from moving to the new pages. So in grasping that all together in terms of concept is how does that actually take place on the ground? So if you're looking at your timeline leading up to 25C, this is obviously earlier than 25C is what we're suggesting rollout. You might decide to phase your approach. And we would recommend that. And in this example, what we've got is some basic things in the setup where we would configure a Visual Builder project for the first time and maintain that for each phase that follows later. And then take a chunk of things, and you could do this by module, you could do it by user experience groupings, however you feel is most appropriate, and have a timeline that allows you to push that into a development environment, check that it's working through some rigorous testing, and then pick that up and move it onto your production environment. And then the same process can be followed for phase 2, phase 3, and so on. So when you're thinking about your resources and your skill sets, putting this down into a Gantt chart can help to visualize the time that you have available to you before you get to August. Okay, so who would your team be? If you're an HCM client or an ERP client using self-service procurement, you would typically have someone who's a Fusion administrator in-house. If you don't have that, then you may have a bureau through managed service where you've got some support on our side with some of the people that work in our managed services team. So your Fusion administrator is going to be a key stakeholder in this, someone who's going to be granting the security rules that will need to have that need to be given to your developers in order to access Visual Builder Studio to make some of those personalizations that we talked about. That might be the same person as your VB administrator. So if you're a client that has access to Design Studio, which is the thing that you use in responsive in order to design those pages and personalize them, that's that native within Fusion. Visual Builder Studio is an entirely separate thing and is linked environment to environment. So you have a VB portal, I would call it, for each development environment, each production and test environment that you might have. They can be one and the same person. So if I was working at an organization that needed to do this, I might also manage Visual Builder as well as Fusion. Your developers will be the people actually doing the personalization changes. So whoever you might have in your business that does the Design Studio changes, makes tweaks, does validation rules, they might be the same people that now do it in Visual Builder Studio. And then along the bottom line are people that you might need to consider for your business process, and then also adoption strategy. So approvers would be your people who might be a change board. It could be a senior leadership team that need to sign off on things going into your production system. You don't need to formalize that necessarily in your Visual Builder Studio, but you do need to think about who those people are so that we're following a change process and that things don't accidentally make their way into the production environment and cause problems with your end users. The last two, Oracle Guided Learning and Oracle Digital Assistant admins. If you've got the paid license for Oracle Guided Learning, then that's step-by-step guides that you might have deployed will need to be reviewed at the same time that you're doing the testing for the front-end work. So your guided learning will potentially, for step-by-step guides, have touch points on pages that it needs to hang off of. If those changes in Redwood fundamentally adapt where that field might sit on the page or make it very different, that will manually need to be adjusted unless it's a base guide that you've used. Digital Assistant is more dynamic. So if you're using Digital Assistant for your employees, or you've given it out to managers as well, that is more dynamic to switching on Redwood profile options. So fundamentally, there's parts to the development, to the release of Redwood when you're doing it in your own environments. When you switch on your Redwood profile options to make pages turn to Redwood, your digital assistant will pick up on any links that refer to that Redwood page instead of your responsive page. And if someone's typing in and saying, show me my payslip, and you've switched on the Redwood payslip page, it will automatically direct them to there instead of the responsive page. So there's certain degrees of flexibility around digital assistant, but not the same for Oracle guided learning. So the people who manage those are going to be key in order to make sure that you've tested that experience fully. And in terms of Redwood activation, there's some prerequisites, again, with people, but more on the system side of access. So what are you going to have to give your different stakeholders access to in order to do the work that they need to do? So if I am a Fusion administrator, I have access to HCM and the security console, I would need to grant whoever the developers are, potentially the application admin role or the application developer role. And the two have different roles reflected in Visual Builder Studio 2, and they can carry across in a synchronization job. So if I'm an administrator, I would potentially need to have application administrator role. I'd need to have synchronization enabled administrator identity role 2. And if I'm going to have my credentials set up to allow things to go from Visual Builder Studio, where I'm making all the personalizations appear then in Fusion, I'd also need the bottom middle role here, Human Capital Management Application Administrator. If I'm a developer, then I would just need these bottom 3. And the difference between the two is apparent in when you go into Visual Builder Studio, you'll see different sections. So similar to how security works in Fusion, administrator will grant you more than a developer would have access to. Something critical to know about these roles is when you're in Visual Builder Studio and you're setting up your connection between your Fusion environment and your Visual Builder Studio environment in order to deploy your changes, that user that has the credentials put in against the environment needs to have no single sign-on against it. So for those of you who use single sign-on, if that's an issue, then there's different ways that you can do that. But primarily the easiest way forward is when you're adding, let's say, your development 1 environment connected to your Visual Builder Studio, that you have a separate deployment user, which many of you may already have, running things like scheduled processes, that's not connected to a person, a real person in the system. And the username and password for that needs to be a non-single sign-on setup. So if you have single sign-on, I would say creating another deployment user, and have that in whichever environments you need to have it in, and connect up through your environment in Visual Builder Studio. Okay, so thinking about your compatible features and tools, there are certain things that are there available to you to help the adoption within your business, so end users and also your developers. So Personalisation Helper tool, we've put the link in here on these slides, which I think are going to be shared with you after the session potentially. The Personalisation Helper tool, as I say, is available in Cloud Cloud Center of Excellence, and will allow you to download what you've got in your Design Studio and move that across into Visual Builder. User interface text is something that's has been available for a long time, but allows you to do some of those field name changes that might be critical to you. So you might have customizations in an old way of doing things through Page Composer. Let's say you want to change the name of a field from gender to sex, because, you know, if you're hiring somebody in on the HCM side and using their information for payrolling them, the field that's called gender is technically the HMRC sex field, so female or male. And you may want to change the nomenclature of that to be something that's called sex instead of gender, to be clearer to your self-service users. That user interface text allows you to do that and is compatible with Redwood. Any Page Composer changes you had previously that where you changed field names is not going to be migratable. Structure tool is still there, still available in sandboxes, and that allows you to switch on and off actions that might be Redwood specific or responsive. you'll notice when you do your own migration, when you switch on some Redwood profile options, that the actions might appear as double. So you might have two of something like jobs and managed jobs, or you might find that it just changes to a Redwood page and the responsive one is no longer visible. So when you do that switch on for the first time, it's worth going in as different users, employees, managers, specialists, and checking whether there's additional links there that you want to hide or promote. So that's what you would use the structure tool for. Guided journeys is available within journeys now, and that allows you to set some additional context on the page. And in 24D, you have now got the feature available to embed reports onto pages. There was a period of time for anyone who might have moved to Redwood earlier that if you had a BI report or an OTBI report embedded on a page, that you did that directly through different means. You didn't do it through a guided journey, and Redwood didn't really have an equivalent for that. Now it does. So on many pages now, you're able to embed reports, you're able to embed other content and links and contextual information on the page. So we've got a couple of screenshots of an example of how we might use that. Your guided journey is also going to be fundamental for your AI agent. So for those of you who are up to speed on what Oracle have released regarding AI agents, that's going to be a really great feature within guided journeys. And we've spoken about guided learning before. It's just to highlight that by October, if you're using the free license for Oracle Guided Learning, that will be deprecated. And if you want to then discuss with your customer success manager, Oracle, about purchasing the main Oracle Guided Learning license, then I'm just flagging that up now. Okay. So we talked about the user interface text, and this is the kind of thing that you might see and use on your Redwood pages. So that's just an example to show how you might use that in congruence with Visual Builder Studio. And the bottom screenshot is an example of a guided journey, how that integrates with your pages. So previously you might have had information on a DFF that you might want to give some more context around what you're collecting it for, how you're going to use that information. So guided journeys gives you that option on the page. But the biggest thing that we found that clients struggle with is Visual Builder Studio, because there's a lot of new terminology that's associated with using this that isn't native or understood that well within functional users. So if you've been purely front-end system-based for a long time and you've never done an IT degree, you don't know anything about Prince 2 project principles and IT agile projects, this is going to be completely alien to you. And that's the feedback that Oracle have received in a lot of ways. So what we thought might be helpful is to outline some of the terminology to help sort of land an understanding of what Visual Builder Studio is and does. So you'll need to have a Visual Builder Studio portal, and that has a direct relationship with your Fusion environment. And you can use one project for all of your environments if you want, in order to just move from one environment to another. If you tested it down in Dev 1 and you just want to push the exact same thing into your test environment to your production, this is a much easier way than previously in Design Studio, where you had to replicate it manually or export it and import it into the next environment and then publish it. This is a much cleaner way of doing things. But fundamentally, your project is where you're holding all of that personalization work now. So it's a hosting space for your project members to work in. That's your developers, that's your administrator, that's maybe your approvers, and it needs to exist before workspaces. Well, on the next slide, you'll see how that actually follows through on the end user experience when you're setting it up for the first time. Your Git repository, again, this is brand new terminology for a lot of people. Your Git repository is essentially the code and the files that compile your personalization. So if I've made a change on personal information screen so that I'm showing date of birth, but keeping it read-only, I'm showing some fields related to sexual orientation, ethnicity, that's a personalization. That's not necessarily there from the very beginning of a Redwood page. You might need to show that or hide it. That is then packaged up after I make that change in Visual Builder into your Git repository, and it sits there with an accumulation of other changes to collect all together the things that you want to see on your Fusion environment. So the end user experience is held in the Git repository, okay? When you go into a Git repository, it starts to make sense. You can see sort of like when you go into folder structures in on your computer and you drill down from like a top folder into where your files are, that's essentially how a Git repository is structured. A workspace is a hosting space for your Git repositories. So you'll have a workspace for HCM work potentially, and linked to that is an HCM Git repository. You would also have a workspace for ERP or CX work for your HR help desk, and again, a Git repository for HR help desk. The same again for procurement. Branch is sort of a snapshot of what is happening in your development. So when you go into a Redwood page and you want to change something on that page, you want to show a field, hide a field, add some validation, you would click onto on the top right corner of Fusion to say, I want to edit this page in Visual Builder Studio. And in the back end, in the scenes behind, what it will do is create a branch for you. So it's taking like a draft version of your Git repository and saying, keep this while I work on this particular piece. And then once I publish that change, that branch will disappear and it will push into what's called a main branch. That's where all of that package of changes that I might be doing and Sophia might be doing on another page, we'll pull that all together into the main branch and publish that into the Git repository and into Fusion. Environments is pretty self-explanatory. If you're familiar with the Fusion terminology for environment, that's Dev 1, Dev 2, test, production, and you can make a direct one-to-one link within your project to each environment. And you can move from one environment to another. So you can publish something into Dev and then make sure that you lift and shift that, essentially clone it into your production environment, into your test environment. Builds is also called jobs. So the two are kind of interchangeable terminology, and they form, when I did this presentation in December, it was quite appropriate timing because we talked about wrapping Christmas presents and sending them out, what address we're sending it to. And the package job happens first because you're going to wrap your present up. So you're going to put all of those personalizations together into a package. And then you're going to deploy that. And the deployment is the address. That's, are you going to send this to Dev 1? You're going to send it to Dev 3. You're going to send it to test. You're going to send it to production. And so when you've got your environments configured, you need a deploy job if you're going to use the next thing, CI/CD pipeline, to make sure that whatever you've packaged up over here makes it to your dev environment, makes it to your test environment, makes it to your prod environment. So those two parts, environments and builds, are sort of very closely linked. They run in parallel. Now your CI/CD pipeline takes that package, takes the deployment and sort of formalizes it into a process. So you'll have a start, you'll have a package, you'll have a deploy. And you can connect those different deploy jobs up together. So you could have a start, you could have a package, you could have 3 deploys, one to Dev 1, one to Dev 2, one to Dev 3. You don't have to use this feature. As of 24D, they've switched this off by default. So if you went in to create your VB project for the first time today, you wouldn't even maybe be aware that that's there. What you would probably have is set up your environment link and just immediately publish, which has its pros and cons, which I can talk about in the Q&A later. Releases is an optional feature. That's something where you can like manually keep a track of the different features that you might want to package all up together and push. For me, this is very developer-focused terminology and something that I haven't seen a use case for yet for functional people like us. So I would say be aware of it, but it's not something that you necessarily need to use. And then finally, again, if you've been in webinars, you might have heard Oracle talk about express mode and advanced mode. And fundamentally, the differences are that express mode is the way that Oracle want you to use the tool. So if you're in your Visual Builder project and you're doing various things on pages, you'll see that there's an equivalent of your Design Studio that you would have used in responsive. It's called business rules now. You might have an equivalent of autocomplete rules that you would have seen in sandboxes, is now available as validation rules in Visual Builder Studio. And that's all encased in this express mode. It's to give you a front end, something nice to understand and easy to work through to make your changes, and then you can publish directly onto your page from there. And the advanced mode is more for your HR help desk or for use cases that Oracle have agreed to. They would disregard advanced mode and tell you not to use that and don't actually support you using it unless it's for any particular thing they've signed off on. So what you'll see on the next slide, or a couple of slides from now, is express mode. That's what I'll be showing you. So to just summarize, and the key components when you're using Visual Builder Studio is you'll have your Fusion environment. We'll call this Dev 1 for now. And I've gone into a page on Dev 1 and I want to change it. So let's say it's the hire an employee flow. I want to change some things on that page to take some sections away, add some new fields in onto assignment information, maybe make the payroll section mandatory. So I'd click on that page in Fusion and I get the option on the top right corner to say edit page in Visual Builder Studio. And the first time I go into it, it will ask me, do I want to set up a project? My answer is going to be yes, I need one. And then it will walk me through a wizard step to create a workspace that sits within my project. Then it will create a Git repository. And as I mentioned earlier, that has a direct relationship with your workspace. So there'll be one for HCM, one for CX for your HR help desk, one for ERP for your procurement. By default, every time you go into edit a page in Visual Builder Studio, it will give you a branch to work in, and there will always be a main branch. So your branches and your workspaces and Git repository all sort of are interdependent. Then you've got your build jobs as once you're ready to make your changes appear in Fusion, you've got your build jobs that will take that information from your branch into main branch and take that into your build jobs. And remember, we talked about build jobs and environment being parallel, interdependent. So I'll have a deploy job for my Dev 1 environment. I'll have an environment connected in on my project to Dev 1. And if the two are in lockstep, then it will take the stuff that I've changed on the hire an employee page in my draft in the Visual Builder Studio branch that I was working in and push that into the Fusion environment. In a moment, then it will appear in my Fusion environment. I can then run through and test that from the different security roles that I might need to test that through. So when you're setting your project up for the first time, it's going to create defaults for all of these things I've talked about. So really, effectively, what you're seeing happen is not something you'll actively have to do each time that you do this. It happens once. And then if you need to move from one environment to another, so some additional config steps that you would do within here. So you'll have a default workspace, a default Git repository, a default environment, default package and deploy jobs, and a default pipeline. All that you might need to do after you set this up for the first time is check those login details. Do you remember the non-SSO user I mentioned about 10 minutes ago? And you can also add additional people to see this project. So if you're not the only person developing these personalizations, you might need to add another person from your team. Then you can come into this section and you'll see on the top right-hand corner of this screenshot, a team area where you can add people that have the same kind of level of ability as you and maybe the same security roles. Okay. So this is just showing you a visualization of the pipeline. So I talked about the CI/CD pipeline and how there'll be like a start, a package, and a deploy. That's the standard. So your package takes all of your personalizations, your deploy is where is that going to go to? You don't have to use this. But what I would say is with the pipeline, you get more of a degree of control over what makes it into your Fusion environments. So you can decide, I'm just going to go with default setup in Visual Builder Studio, and I'm going to have one project in Dev and one environment connected, which is my Dev environment. And that will immediately take any of your changes that you're making and you're publishing straight into that environment. What it's not going to do is clone that and take it automatically into your test environment, into your production. This is where your CI/CD pipeline can help you out. So if you want to connect multiple environments into the same project, then you could say, anytime I do this change, I want it to go to all of my Dev environments at once. Then your CI/CD pipeline can help you do that because you can attach those deployment jobs to the same package so that anytime that package runs, it sends it up straight through to Dev 1, Dev 2, and Dev 3. So when you're deploying to additional environments, you will need to set up an environment link. As I said, there's a VB portal for every environment. In some cases, it could be that you want to set up multiple environments in the same project, and that pipeline I mentioned earlier is how you can also then keep more control over it. You can also just set it up so that you have an environment connected, multiple environments, connected to the same project, and just clone from one to the other to save yourself some time. There's some risk in doing that, particularly around the production environment. I would recommend anyone who wants to set it up like this will leave their production environment out of that setup and just either have it separate in its own project and own workspace and own environment link, or include it in this and have some protection on it around your pipeline and around your deploy jobs. So you can set up what's called job protection on your deployment job for whichever environment, most likely production, so that not just anybody can run something in that Visual Builder Studio project and they end up in production without any approval. Okay, so in terms of best practice, these features that will help to adopt will be your journeys. So building some user experience into journeys, and particularly with guided journeys, will allow people to understand some of the changes that are taking place on the system. So if I'm an employee and tomorrow you're going to switch my experience from responsive to Redwood on every page, I might need to have some additional things and spot points that will help me understand where things are and how to walk through those pages. So guided journeys and journeys are going to be really good for that. If you're an HCM user and you want to migrate people to this new experience of resignation and termination, it will be different in Redwood. So make sure you've got that switched on. Your Redwood Approvals Console is another new feature which doesn't replace your BPM work list, but it is a nice way to help people filter and look at different approvals that might be coming through. Separately, I would check for any new privileges. Oracle, every time there's an upgrade, will release what's called a security reference. And in that, it will tell you what new roles have been created and where it will be inherited into. So take a look out for that and make sure that for your custom security roles, you're rolling anything in that would be Redwood specific. Finally, digital assistant, and if you know about AI Assist, where it's generative AI creating things on your requisition pages in recruitment. If you're using manager surveys, generating those things and goals within the talent area, the new AI Assist can be very helpful and an incentive for end users to take on board the new Redwood pages. Lastly, the AI agents is a fairly new feature. That is what's called a RAG agent. So you might have lots of policy documents. You might have some guidance information that you want to share with people. A good use case to help adoption might be you create a journey for your guidance information for how to use the new self-service. Attach those documents as PDFs that are well formatted into that guided journey within a journey. Switch on your AI agent. And your AI agent can essentially act as like a question portal where people can type in as like, where can I find my payslip now? And the AI agent will traverse through those PDF documents and bring back the answer for the end user. You obviously can put links and things in there as well that could be helpful. Okay, so to summarize best practice, we'll get into the Q&A as soon as possible. One project, I would recommend one project, and that's what Oracle are telling us that we need to have. One workspace for each pillar, that's HCM, HR Help Desk, and the ERP self-service procurement. You can use what's called branch protection in your production environment so that things that might make their way into the production environment have approval before they're even published. Or you could put job protection on so that someone can't just lift and shift all of the personalizations from one environment and push it into production. I would suggest that you have common user credentials, that non-SSO user, and that's in your deployment job and in your environment if you're going to use the jobs. If not, then you don't need to worry about it. And avoid working on the same pages as other developers to avoid merge conflict. So if I'm going in and doing changes on the personal details page and I haven't published that yet, and my colleague Sophia is going in and also making changes on that page, by the time we both get to publish, there's going to be differences. So try and portion the work out so that you're doing different things from the people that you work with. And a little tip from us, publish little and often. So make a change, send it out, make a change, send it out. Try to avoid holding on to your draft version of your Git repository in your developer branch for weeks on end, because things change quite quickly in Visual Builder Studio. By the time you come to publish that, again, you might come across merge conflicts. There's some other resources in here that can help to build on that best practice knowledge. And as I say, in terms of the lessons learned, test. Make sure that for your production environment, that you've got some security on that production branch or on that job. And if you need to revert to responsive, make sure you're in close communication with Oracle through an SR, through your customer success manager or your account director, so that they're aware that there's things that you physically cannot move yet because of problems that you might have come across in your Redwood pages. That should be fewer and far between than it used to be last year when things were changing at a quite high pace. Quite settled now, so just make sure you've got your Oracle relationship in step there. And for those of you who've listened to today and thought, you know what, I want Namos to help me out on this. I'm not sure if we have the resources or the time in order to do this all for ourselves. This is just to show you we've got a couple of packages available, whether you just want some training, that's a day of contact, or whether you want us to do some of the work for you. That's the gold and the silver and the bronze packages. So just speak to your managed service contact if you would like to take that further. And yeah, we'll just go to Q&A. We've got a couple of minutes left, but if people are happy to stay on longer, I am too, up until 1 o'clock. So open the floor for questions.
Thanks, Danielle. That was great. So there aren't any specific questions in the Q&A chat, but it might be worth, Danielle, kind of letting the audience know from your experience if you've got any advice on kind of modules that might be a bit trickier than others to migrate over.
Yeah, so it might not be a surprise to people, but the core HR module is the biggest and the gnarliest sometimes. Particularly if you have lots of different flows that managers might have a view of, and this HR specialist might also use that page. You might have quite some complicated rules in order to show or hide different things to different users. So those would be the most difficult to migrate, particularly if they're complicated. If you've kept it fairly vanilla, then you shouldn't have too many issues with the core module. I know from some of the roadmap stuff that there's recruitment things that haven't moved over yet. So it could be that you might want to delay doing some phasing work on that rather than find more problems than it's worth solving now, is wait another version and there'll be new things in 25B related to recruitment that will help your migration effort. Some of the more light touch areas would be more like payroll and absence. There's not so much in that space that is very different. So if you'd like to take a jump at the payroll or the absence module, that could be a good area to start with.
We have just got a couple of questions now in the chat actually from Toby, so thanks for your questions. First one being, do we need to purchase licenses for using the VB Studio?
No, it's all included within your core licensing. So if you have HCM or self-service procurement, then it's available for you to use now. Same for HR Help Desk, sorry. It just comes as standard.
And can VB Studio also be used for Oracle Finance?
At this stage, I think the only ones that I'm aware of is self-service procurement and supplier portal. I'm not sure that there's much else in the finance ERP side of the offering that is expected to move to Redwood yet.
Okay, perfect. I think that's everything. Then we've got tons of questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much, both of you, for Q&A that's there. So to everyone, please feel free to reach out to us if you have any further questions or you want help on any of these aspects. I know that there was a couple of links in those slides, so we'll try to get those out to you, the slides with the links in there. Just a reminder about the survey link. That is for the end of April, an in-person event, and we'd really like to know what you are interested in. It could be any topic, so please feel free to write those in that survey. And apart from that, we'd love to see you at Cloud World. There's some registration details there for our networking events. So thank you, Sophia and Danielle, and thank you everyone else for attending today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, we've got a hand up from Amy.
Sorry.
Oh no, I think it's just clapping.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.